Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today, to conclude our little Miyazaki series, myself, Hilary White, and Nicolò Grasso sit down to discuss The Boy and the Heron. This is an episode that's been a long time coming for the show. Originally, we were going to do this episode right when the film released, but I'm actually kind of glad we delayed it for these years. This is a film that has a lot to break down, it has a lot for audiences to meditate on and think about, and I think it's good that we had some reflection to really let the project sit with us and develop our personal relationship with the film and what we see within its runtime. The film is highly unusual both for Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki in how abstract it is, almost feeling like a David Lynch project at times. Don't worry, that is a comparison we definitely get into today. I always enjoy a ClapperCast episode where we all have different takes on what the film is getting at, and we all share our different interpretations, sharing different ideas and pushing how each other think, and today is definitely an episode just like that. I'm very excited to get into this, so let's go ahead and get right into our review of The Boy and the Heron. Okay, Hilary and Nick, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited for this because originally we were going to do this episode when the film was originally releasing in theaters. We ended up having a bunch of scheduling issues with trying to get screenings and stuff, so we pushed it off of there. But finally, we are able to go in depth with The Boy and the Heron. I'm actually happy we've had a few years to kind of meditate on this, to see it again from home. I think this is a film that is obviously going to require quite a bit of discussion. I think first, let's give overall thoughts on how we felt about the movie, and then maybe we can get into some more in-depth thoughts on meanings and what we're seeing within the film, because it is a film that I think has a lot of interpretation to get through. So first, I'll turn it over to Nick. You first. What are your opening thoughts? How did you enjoy? And when I saw this, I will say the first thing I thought of is, oh, Nick is going to love this movie. What is your thoughts on The Boy and the Heron?
You know me so well, Carson, by now. It's amazing. Yeah, I loved The Boy and the Heron. I first watched it when it came out. It was like Christmas 2023. It was like in December, January. My first Ghibli film on the big screen. I was very excited about it. I tried to avoid, as a Japanese public did, just like no trailers, just the poster, very ambiguous poster, the drawing of Miyazaki of the Heron, and I was blown away by it. At the time, I would not have considered myself a Ghibli fan or Miyazaki fan, even though I do like most of his works. But this one just felt special. Um, in a way, it is his most complete and mature work. And there's so much to talk about in here, but just for me, it's the one that emotionally resonates the deepest. And rewatching it today, after having experienced his entire filmography, at least the feature films, it worked even better, to the point that I would say this is my favorite Miyazaki film. The fact that it's a film of two halves, which is always something that I love, where the first part is a bit more grounded in reality. It's very somber. It's very reflexive. Takes its time. This kid dealing with grief and finding himself in a new place with a new mother, just like trying to cope with all of that, and then going on this grand adventure that is not stretched out. It's not like Castle in the Sky on some of the others early films where you're like, it's a good film, but it lasts a bit too long. No, it's just 1 hour, the second half, where you go into this colorful, magical world that's between time and space. I love the designs of the characters in here. I love the soundtrack by Joe Hisaishi, sorry. And yeah, it's just like general thoughts. I love this film. It made me cry rewatching it again today. I ended up watching the making of documentary. That made me cry. So I'm very excited to delve a bit deeper into this work because it's truly special in my opinion.
Hilary?
This was a first-time watch for me, but I was aware of the film when it got released, and I actually contacted my sister the moment I became aware of it, because the gray heron or the blue heron here in the States is like a really particularly special bird for her. And she was also going through a Studio Ghibli, Miyazaki phase. She was watching all the films again and stuff. So I said, do you know that they're making a film and it's about a boy and a heron? And she said, oh, this is amazing. So she went and saw it, and then she contacted me after she'd seen it, and she just said, I had no idea that Robert Pattinson did the voice of the heron. Like, that took the head of like the top of her head off. She just had no idea that he was capable of doing that. And she was so on it. She didn't like it as much as the other films, but watching it myself, I became very involved with it. And I know that it's a very common thing to say about Miyazaki's films, but this one is so beautiful. Every single frame, every single image in it is just very, very detailed and thought out and just gorgeous to look at. So as far as it, like Nicholas said, this is going to be, or it is at this moment, his most mature work. It's very, very beautiful. Maybe the most beautiful one I've seen, and I haven't seen all of his films yet. So I was very surprised that I ended up engaging with it as much as I did, and also seeing how it relates to other things that have come from the studio and from his previous films. In particular, I was really surprised by this, but the beginning very much linked to Grave of the Fireflies, which we also did an episode on. And if you're listening to this and you want supplemental material to listen to after, there's an episode where we talk about that film. And I'd say that these two films in certain ways are linked because it is about the fallout of World War II and how, young people of that particular generation deal with grief and loss and rebuilding their lives. But it kind of moves beyond that realistic realm, as Nicolò pointed out, and it goes into this area where, with Miyazaki in particular, and then I'd say like Japanese filmmaking in general, especially when it's animated, you never know what's going to happen. And I find that incredibly engaging and just kind of wild. You never know what you're going to see next or who the characters are going to be interacting with. And this film serves that up on a silver platter. I could not have predicted anything that was going to happen. And I'm not the usual viewer who does. He's always trying to guess. So I just really trusted with the journey and went along with it and heartily enjoyed it on a level that I did not really expect. And I really liked this film.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much am going to echo your statements. As someone who's a massive Studio Ghibli fan, as someone who's a massive Hayao Miyazaki fan, I've seen pretty much everything he's directed. I've seen the music videos. I've seen Future Boy Conan. I've gone deep on this guy, and I never in a million years would have imagined he would produce something like this. Truly, it is so singular in just this entire studio's filmography, much less his directors, which really caught me off guard. Very, very fantastical, very, very fun, very deep, very meaningful. Is one of those films that you sit and watch, and I think it just demands engagement. It demands your mind to sit there and poke at it and go on this journey with these characters and figure out how you want to engage with its story. The animation here, and Miyazaki, and we've done a whole Miyazaki series. We did Grave of the Fireflies, right? We've talked a lot about Studio Ghibli. Still, and I'm so happy that I got the chance to see this on the big screen originally. The animation here is stunning. There's so much movement. Every single scene has movement. Every single character and vehicle and body has a weight to it that is so over the top, where you just don't get films like this anymore. You don't get anime, especially hand-drawn films, where there's so much effort put into these crowd scenes where everyone is moving in a different direction. When they step onto the bike, the entire bike shifts its weight and bounces. Like, there are little things that just bring this world to life. But at this core is this dual story, as Nick mentions, one of which, and obviously I think all of it for me speaks very personally to Miyazaki. I get the sense this is a very personal film for him. One of his, if not his last project, right? Apparently he's working on some more stuff, but this might be his last feature he ever makes, adapting, quote unquote, adapting one of his favorite childhood books, even though this has nothing to do with that book. Only the book makes an appearance in it. I don't know why they were framing this as an adaptation. But you get this really grounded story of a boy who is forced to leave his city once his mom dies, and he's dealing with his mom's death and trying to find his place in the world. Very similar to how Miyazaki did, right? I mean, we talked about this somewhat with Grave of the Fireflies even. Like, he went through a lot of this as a child. There's a lot of echoes to his practical life. And then you get the story of the Heron and how he goes through this really Again, fantastical, imaginative adventure where he has to find his mother in this weird world. He's traveling between all these different realms. You have all these birds who seemingly are very hungry and want to eat him. Then there's a bunch here about creativity. This one has so much in it that you just would never, in my opinion, again, expect from Studio Ghibli. And I love that this many years in, he's created 13 with this film, major projects if you include Future Boy Conan. He still finds a way to surprise me. He still finds a way to just leave my jaw dropped in a way that I would never have expected. So I really appreciate this film. Definitely not. I know there's a lot of people who don't really watch a lot of Studio Ghibli who was like, oh, I'm excited to go see this. It's definitely unique. I don't think a lot of just average audiences are going to watch this and get much from it. I don't, Hillary, your story, I believe it. I believe a lot of people would go to this and be like, well, it was pretty, but what the fuck was any of that?
I know very people validly. Like that.
But I really love it. And returning to this work now, talking about this film, and specifically this time really taking some notes and really trying to wrestle with it. I think this is a very, very rewarding feature. I think with one more watch, or maybe just even this conversation, I'm going to go to 5 stars on it just because I think there is so much here.
It's a challenge. Let's do it. We'll get to 5 stars, Carson.
Maybe do we want to get into some of the themes and what we're actually seeing within this narrative?
I think the only one that I didn't catch on to until I think after I saw the film and read a little bit more was that it was about Miyazaki relinquishing his empire a little bit, or the whole idea of trying to pass on something. So we could get into that. That wasn't what made it resonate with me, but it was an angle that I wasn't aware of. And there's probably tons more.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see a lot here about, and you mentioned even with World War II, Hillary, and I'd love to get into that point also, having this point of rebirth, of having this point of a new start after something traumatic with this war, or just simply after living a life and redefining and building a society, right? You have these blocks that apparently make up society, and how do you build them? Who's in charge of building them and making sure everything is stable? It's a theme that we've talked about a lot with Miyazaki with this series. We talked about The Grave of the Fireflies. We talked about it with Nazca, The Valley of the Wind. We talked about it a lot with Pogo Rosso, where there's a lot of those themes that are present throughout Studio Ghibli's career. But I think here it's Miyazaki looking very personally. I see this as discussing the role of the artist and discussing Miyazaki's role of the artist and trying to pass on, not even just practically with Studio Ghibli, but passing on just for everyone to feel the artistic endeavor and be inspired. I found a lot of power within that, but also you can apply that to Japanese society as a whole as they go through this identity crisis that has been captured in so many pieces of cinema, whether you're talking animation or live action. I think there's a lot of nuance there to be found.
Yeah, that was an interesting theme, this whole part about the legacy and the going out, because I remember when the movie came out, I was reading some reviews either before or after watching it myself, that were drawing comparisons to his relationship with Goro Miyazaki, his son, who he doesn't really like, and he doesn't really like his work, probably for good reason. I've seen Tales from the Earthsea, not a fan. I really don't want to watch Erwig the Bad Witch, whatever that's called, honestly. So I remember reading a lot of those parallels, but also now I was rewatching it, and that entire relationship, because this is primarily between, you see this between the kid and the grand uncle, this mastermind behind who's controlling everything and who wants to pass on. I saw it in a different way, not so much of just I saw it as just trying to build this, try to preserve a perfect world utopia that's actually already imperfect, and by recognizing those imperfections and the fact that there is evil in the world, it also means that there is love in the world and that you should cherish and preserve those relationships. I found that to be very moving, and also just my entire view of the movie has shifted, because I was looking at what was coming out and stuff related to Ghibli, and I realized there was a making of documentary about The Boy and the Heron. I don't know if you've seen it, Carson, actually. Hayao Miyazaki and the Heron.
No, I was gonna watch it before this, and then it just time escaped me. So no, I've not seen it.
I'm glad I managed to watch it because all those documentaries are gold. Just seeing Miyazaki and the rest of the Ghibli crew, Suzuki at work. But this one felt like the sense of grief was so strong throughout the film. And going into the documentary, the fact that Takahata, the director of Grave of the Fireflies, Pompoko, and Neighbors Yamada's, all those films, he passed away right around the time they were planning this film. It was like 1 or 2 years into production. It's because of him that Miyazaki decided to come out of retirement almost right after getting into it, because they always had this love-hate relationship. And the documentary goes at length into just how much Miyazaki was thinking about him while working on it. And he actually saw Takahata, Paksan, he calls him throughout the film, as the granduncle. And he saw himself as the kid, which is kind of like I've seen this film like 3 hours ago. It finished 4 hours ago, and I'm still kind of like, oh my god, this is changing that entire dynamic and the way of looking at it. But also, the work stands on its own, and by not knowing those things, you see different things. But it was just fascinating insight into his own creativity, and just again how much sadness is present in here in a way that's not prevalent in something like Porco Rosso. It is touched upon. Even in Wind Rises, like those elements are there, but Miyazaki is flirting with that sadness. While in here, it's front and center. It's literally, as you mentioned, both of you, the opening of the film is that destruction, those shadow people. It's striking imagery. It gives me chills. The music as well, and all of that is terrifying. But yeah, no, a lot of sadness. A lot of sadness.
I
Sorry,
can
Hillary,
weigh
didn't
in
want
a
to
little
block
bit.
you.
No, that's okay. No. That's the nature of these podcasts, because I mean, if anyone's listening, like we're all on a Zoom call and the timing's always a little bit off. So sometimes we end up talking over each other. And
To be clear, we're on zencaster.com, which you can get 50% off your first monthly subscription if you go down in the description, just FYI. But
I love a plug. Yeah, it is like a Zoom call, but we are technically on Zencaster and do what Carson said. So, yes, I think the one thing I walked away from, well, that's not true. There was more than one thing, but one of the main things I walked away with was that this man knows things that I don't know. And that's something that is attained through age, wisdom, experience, and especially like where he's coming from, what his background is. And I find that incredibly important now in this particular moment in history to listen to somebody who's actually been through a world war and remembers what it was like and how that affects everything, you know? And especially where things are right now, we need things like this in order to give us an idea of like just how devastating it can actually be, and that this is not entertainment, it's not a game, it's not something that's abstract or a concept, especially to Westerners and in particular the United States. We don't know what it's like to go through something like what Japan went through during World War II. Or I'll also say I or any other U.S. citizen doesn't know what it was like for Nicolò and what his family and previous generations and his family went through during World War II, because they saw it. They had to deal with it person to person, and it wasn't something they watched on TV or read about on social media. It was something that was happening in their backyards, and how that affected Miyazaki creatively, I find very potent and not only beautiful, but one of the things that I'm pulling from this conversation already is one of the ways that you do survive can be creativity, and then also creating worlds within yourself. Like it was stated earlier, like these worlds you create within yourself aren't going to be perfect either, and there will be flaws and there will be violence and darkness and things like that. But it's important to maintain that. And if you're lucky enough, like Miyazaki or all these artists out there that we know by name, you'll be able to share it with other people and it will mean something to them. So that's a piece that I'm coming away with in real time right now, just how important this is and how it can be missed. And I can't really say more than that at the moment right now. I'm just processing it right now and how important that is. I want to hear you guys weigh in on this.
Did you know you could be listening to this episode of ClapperCast early? Well, if you go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/ClapperCast podcast, there are 3 different tiers that you can choose from, each with their own means of support and each with their own means of rewards. You can get access to early episodes, bonus monthly episodes, bonus reviews. You can see our schedule early. Of course, thank you everyone who's already joined us on Patreon, and we hope to see you over there soon. My response is both of you. I'll start, Hillary, with your point, because one of my favorite scenes, I think goes so overlooked, and I get why, is when the kid is feeling sad, our main character, and he's in his room and he finds the book, How Do I Live? And he opens it up and there's a section where it's just about the kid in the book, and I've not read the books, to be clear, but he's leaving his town and he's going to go live in a rural city, very similar to how our main character is. It reflects his own life, and he just breaks down crying, and he just obsesses almost over this book in that moment. It's a foundational core of ClapperCast, the importance of being seen on screen and the power of art as a healing factor, as a way to see yourself and to digest, and almost as a form of therapy. Please go get therapy still, but that power, I think, is so well reflected here, and you can tell just how much that meant to Miyazaki and how much that pushed him to try to create these works that could be that for someone else. I think that is beautiful. I think that is inspiring. It gives his entire career another level of heart and purpose and meaning that I find just to be very touching. And then, Nick, your point about Takahata, one thing that struck out to me is how much this film references Ghibli's and specifically Miyazaki's career. There are references, visual references, directly to like every single one of Miyazaki's works, like literally every single one. And this idea that if you want to look at this guy who is creating these blocks, creating these worlds that we've been in, and attribute that to Takahata as a tribute to his friend, his mentor, who's been there this entire time on every step of Miyazaki's journey. He's been the right-hand man, to credit him with helping create these worlds, create this magic that we obviously put Hayao Miyazaki as the name, but giving that credit to his mentor who's passed away. I'm getting legitimate chills just thinking about how beautiful that is. I could probably cry if I tried hard enough, to be honest. I think it is so touching, and I think it's beautiful. Very interesting how that affected production. Originally that relationship was going to be much more heavily involved throughout the narrative, and then they kind of reduced it and put the Heron more in there. And if you also want to go down that route, I think there's so much here about specifically the creative process of being a filmmaker, and how do people or parrots consume your artwork. How do you fall into these traps where you maintain your artistic integrity and maintain this honest spirit while dealing with this world that constantly wants to eat and consume what you are creating and building. Also, again, the AI conversations right now could not be more poignant. There's so much there in those 2 themes that you both mentioned. And I think that's one of the things about this movie, as I'm sure we're going to keep going into, is just like they both exist. They're both there so tangibly. I don't want to use this term lightly, but it feels, and I want to use this correctly, it feels Lynchian in a way, to where there's so much here that has meaning and be backed up. And it's not just weird for the sake of being weird, but every time you dig in, it has this emotional core to where, like, this as a tribute to his mentor, I could cry. This as a tribute to him as a young child finding media and then growing as an artist, I could cry, right? Like, those are so beautiful and poignant. And then add the fact that this might be his last feature, and this is with the last statement he wants to make. Also, in comparison to The Wind Rises, which was very, very inner, it was very self, and this is still very Hayao Miyazaki self, but really this is a statement about those around him on his journey, I would say, rather than The Wind Rises, which is really looking at him and his family. I get chills. It is an artist that is honest and mature, working at such a high level, to where the only comparison is one of the very few films I would authentically say to me feels like Lynch at his best. I don't know, Nick, you're a big Lynch fan. I don't want to be like making these comparisons.
The resident Lynch
to
guy.
Be clear. I don't know. Do you agree with that statement at all? Or I guess, how would you, I mean, I don't know.
I wouldn't go so far as say it's Lynchian, but I do agree that I would draw comparisons more so than to Lynch. I would draw more comparisons to actually the Rosetta Stone, Wizard of Oz, because it has that little element of the kid falling into the other world, and there's the parallel, like, oh wait, you're actually that woman from back home, and actually, oh wait, you're my mother but younger. Just like all those things. There's the magical wizard in the tower thing, whatever. Like it's much more. It felt closer to the Wizard of Oz in that sense, but also, yeah, like you mentioned, Lynch. Um, and I think that's one of the reasons why the movie. That's one of the reasons why I left the movie absolutely loving it, and why I know multiple people, friends who went to watch it and didn't like it, because it's not. I mean, it goes back to the age old animation is a type of storytelling, it's not a genre. um, Many were baffled by the seriousness of the film, the fact that there's blood multiple times in a way that doesn't shy away from showing it. I think the moment when the kid tries to bash his head in with a rock fucks me up. I remember watching, I was like, oh my god, I forgot about that intensity. It's a mature story, and simply because you have the Wara Waras are super cute as hell and just floating into the sky chanting doesn't mean that it's a film for children. Um, and the story, I wouldn't say it's a complicated story, but it's a magical story. And that's something that I will always love about Miyazaki, is that he doesn't care about explaining things to you. There is a childlike wonder. And that's something that I've loved in all of those documentaries over the span of like multiple decades. You always see he's living in his little home, he leaves his house and going to work. He passes a kindergarten school with all the little children just like saluting him, because they go to his house every once in a while to see the wooden goats that he put on his windowsill. He gives them candy. It's so delightful, and you see that he loves children and respects them, and he knows you don't need explanations, you don't need to pander to them. And that breaks my heart that people were watching. Like, I get to the ending of this film where I think, okay, you don't understand who the granduncle is, you don't understand how the rules of the world work, but the moment the boy has to say farewell to his mother and is afraid of her going back in her world because it's going ultimately to lead to her death, but she's happy because she lived a good life. She lived a happy life, and she knows she gave birth to a beautiful boy, a good boy. That moment breaks me every time. And I think that goes beyond just like logically understanding the world. If you're not swept up by the emotions at that point, um, it just saddens me the way we are taught at this point of how to watch movies and how stories are supposed to be. I love that Miyazaki just goes in his own direction, while still putting so much of himself and of what he cares about in it. Because there's still a lot of also environmentalism present here, the state of the world and society. I love the reading that you said, Carson, like the parakeets trying to eat up your word, just like obsessively hungry, constantly wanting more to eat from people in the world around them, until it ultimately leads to destruction. It's because of their leader that everything collapses before its time. I don't know. I didn't think about that. I'm like thinking, kind of like you, Hillary. It's like digesting still some things as we talk.
Well, that's what makes these conversations good. And the little bit I can add to this, like regarding Lynch, I immediately understood what Carson said, but I knew that he could be misinterpreted immediately because the term Lynchian is very visual. And this is not necessarily about his style. It's about, I think, where these two men, as separate as they might appear, where they were in their lives, nearing, well, with Lynch, definitely like nearing the end of his life, and Miyazaki, of course, owning up to knowing where he is and coming to terms with his mortality. I'm sure that's a big part of things. But that both of these men, in very different ways, do create narratives that can be very difficult to interpret to people, but they also provide this sea of riches. Like, that's the only image I could kind of come up in my head, where there's so much to plumb and figure out and kind of evaluate and figure out what it means to you, as well as what it might have meant to the artist. And there's two things I wanted to highlight. One was that there was a Lynch series that Uncut Gems did that Nicolò hosted, was in charge of. So if you are a Lynch fan and listening to this, and you're a Miyazaki fan, maybe that brought you here, I would say, of course, like go back into the Uncut Gems archives and figure out where those episodes are and listen to them, because it's great to listen to, especially now that Lynch is gone. And then, of course, the documentary, Nicolò probably already knows about this, but Lynch Oz, about how there's this theories that so much of what he has put in his films originates from The Wizard of Oz. And I didn't see the Oz connection in this Miyazaki film. Like you mentioned earlier, finding out things in real time, that was there as well. I thought there was other little things like Snow White, a girl sleeping in a glass coffin, or bits and pieces of Peter Pan, like not growing old, or Alice in Wonderland. And so there's these Western kind of fairy tale or children's stories influences that creep into this film. And at the same time, he's creating something new. I always feel like my perception as a Westerner going in to see Japanese anime, and especially like animated Studio Ghibli cinema, is trying to process things and knowing that I'm not as familiar with their folklore, their myth making, their history, their mode of storytelling, and that it's completely wild and new for me. And Miyazaki does that in such a beautiful way. And just hearing you talk about how he lives his life also reminds me of Lynch. Both of them had they're in their house, they have these small lives, they know their neighborhood, they are wildly creative, they have a rich inner life, but they don't have like these like bombastic, like larger than life personas where like they're exploring and doing things that other directors are known for. And
both believe in
Miyazaki's
routine, just like that.
Yes, routine, especially with Lynch. I know more about Lynch and his YouTube channel. If anyone here has not checked out David Lynch's YouTube channel, go figure it out. It's just an archive of like the things he did every day. And but Miyazaki also like tying back to children, that children understand his films. And it made me think of another film. I'm going to completely butcher her name, but I love this film. It's Gaspar Noé's wife, or his partner, Lucille Hadzilovic's Innocence, came out in 2004. There was a similar reaction to that was even darker than what Nicolò is describing, where children may go and see this film and engage with it immediately, and adults have a harder time with it. And I did mention my sister before. I want to be clear, I'm not throwing her under the bus. She just didn't like it as much as she thought she was going to. She didn't hate it or anything. So if she's ever listens to this, I'm going to bat for her. But that children understand that. And with Innocence in particular, there's a lot of things that adults saw. They're like, this film like might be pedophilic, or they saw things in the frame that actually weren't there. Like if you watch it, it's like stuff that was hallucinated by adults that made it seem like darker, more disturbing, or predatory toward these young girls. But when the director showed it to young girls, the ages of the girls who are in the film, they had Q&As afterwards, or discussions, and the girls got everything and were not disturbed whatsoever by any indication of impropriety or anything that adults read into the film. So I find that fascinating when there's films that are made, maybe in this one, not so much for children, because Nicolò did bring up some things in the film that, might seem disturbing, but I don't know. I just kind of rolled with it. And with with these childlike influences, it adds like an entirely new dimension to what we're talking about. And once again, I'm reckoning with that in real time. It should be time for someone else to talk for sure. So I'm going to hand it over.
I will say, before Carson can step in, good opportunity to say there's a new film by that director. I saw it at the Berlinale. The Ice Tower, it's called, and it's also about myth making and filmmaking and childhood fascination with fairy tales, and how adults can weaponize that in a potentially predatory way. Go check it out whenever it comes out. Probably next year.
That's on my list for sure.
But
I'm so excited to see that one. So I would back up Nicolò on that one. Definitely, if you haven't heard about that one, add it to your watch list for sure.
Add it to my list. I'm very excited for it now. I also need to check out Innocence. I haven't seen that from 2004. Yeah, Hillary, I mean, also this immediately you talking, I think like I agree with you as far as I think sometimes with anime, or specifically with Studio Ghibli, because there's a lot of references and a lot of the soul of those films are built specifically around Japanese mythology, which is something that you don't necessarily have to understand the nuances always to understand, especially in a Ghibli context. For example, something like Weathering with You, a very different film that we just did an episode on back in February. That has a lot of like deep lore where you kind of need to know what they're talking about in order to get the story. You don't necessarily need to know the nuances of like a forest spirit to understand Totoro, or a Tanukis to understand Pompoko. I think that Ghibli walks that line well. But I also saw a lot of these smaller references, or motifs or themes to animation into these fairy tale stories, and maybe that's a bit unfair to, I guess, put it on the animated side of things, just because a lot of the early Disney films are based around fairy tales. So alas, however you want to digest that. I saw a lot of Snow White too, which also reminded me, Nick, I'm gonna ask you, what is the Agnes Varda film we just did?
Jacques de Nantes.
Exactly. And that film, I'm not going to try to pronounce, so sorry. There's a whole section where he goes cinema and sees Snow White and gets inspired from that. And it's a very small point, but I also was like, oh, it's beautiful to see all these amazing artists. And also both those artists are both him and Miyazaki, very, very tied into the concept of fairy tale on screen and very fairy tale narrative. And we talked about it with Pocoroso. Jack went in quite a bit about early Disney works, and the influence they had on modern animation, and even on Pocoroso. I also found a little bit of beauty there, and like all these creatives from across the world are being influenced and being inspired in some way by these early works, and I thought that was just a little like beautiful poetry I found. So I don't know. I found a lot of that to be quite rewarding. There's a lot here, and clearly it's a lot of like what Miyazaki inspired him as a youth. Whether it's the book, whether it's references to other films, whether it's nature. There's so much here about nature and animals and the power of being surrounded by nature. It is a theme that throughout Studio Ghibli you see so many works, no matter whose voice it is. That is just like, can we go back to nature? Can we escape the city? Can we go back to these simpler ways? Again, there's also a conversation here about the future of Japan. Should we embrace tradition and embrace what we were? Should we build something new and more modern and more complex? I thought that all landed beautifully for me also.
Yeah, I really love
Yeah.
the implications of the ending, where I see it that the true paradise is built on Earth in the end. Like everything is artificial, constructed by the wizard in the tower, the grand uncle, in that alternate universe dimension. Because when all of that collapses, every single creature manages to escape from it into the real world, and they become life-sized. You can say like the parakeets become like actual little parakeets. They are not these gigantic creatures with carrying knives and cleavers and whatnot. It's such a touching little moment, because it's so much just like, yeah, they're gonna stay together and make the most of what they can on Earth. Of course, in that case, it's just animals, but I don't know. I find it to be one of the more hopeful endings, especially considering that you briefly mentioned that Carson, he was supposed to finish his work, his filmography, with The Wind Rises, which doesn't have the most optimistic ending. It's framed in a way like I'm a bit conflicted with the ending of The Wind Rises. We're not talking about that, but I like the way that with Boy and the Heron, because he's approaching death, like you mentioned here, it's 100% on his mind. Like the fact that even in this documentary, it gets to the point where he's like, well, I finished the storyboard. I can die now. People can, they know what to do. They know how to finish the movie. He started, that's another thing that I found interesting. I didn't really realize it. But even rewatching it, I was like, the animation just feels so different here. Like it looks great, but just like compared to the other, like a step up. And it turns out they hired another animator to do the key animations in here. Onda, what's his name? Wait, I don't remember. I had it written down. And the same guy who worked with Satoshi Kon on Millennium Actress. He worked on most of the Evangelion films by Hideaki Anno. So there is already someone that actually passing off the torch, letting someone new, someone younger by 40 years almost, continue the work and take it in his own direction. And Miyazaki, I respect him for not being overly controlling of that, of actually accepting that change, despite some minor grumblings here and there, like, we don't really need that. It's a bit too much work in that case, or whatever. It's very poignant, and it just shines through the film. Even in just the way that it, like, for a movie that is about a kid having to accept the unfortunate passing of his mother, learning to love a new one, and coming to terms with that grief. It's never done in a weepy, moany, cheesy, whatever way that so many other animated films can be, where they put such an emphasis on the tragedy of it all. Miyazaki finds maturity and nobility in just trying to do the right thing, trying to do good, while also recognizing the darkness that comes with that. Because I think the entire sequence where he goes back to school, the kids are teasing him, bullying him, is the posh kid coming from out of town. The father is very rich. And he ultimately decides to just harm himself to feel something. Because you see him, he's just like floating through life at that point. It's so, like, it hits such a personal note for him. Like, it's not something that any other movie would just like randomly put. It's like, that's something a character would do. It feels like it's coming from a very personal and dark place, and it feels personal. It's something that I've experienced, that I've seen in others, where you reach a very dark place of wanting to do something like that, but it never gets lost in those excessively melodramatic beats. It's so beautiful. It's truly, I think that's what really moves me about this film. He never takes it into those directions. I don't know how the two of you feel about that, but
I have something to say. That scene stuck out to me as well, the one where he hits himself in the head with a rock. And I think it didn't completely surprise me, but it disturbed me a little bit that I understood that scene. I want to be clear, I've never hit myself in the head with a rock, but it made me remember something unpleasant. I think I was probably younger than he was by a few years, but something happened that was really upsetting that I don't remember. And I pulled a huge handful of my hair out, almost the exact same spot where he hit himself. And I didn't feel anything. And it's really clear that in that moment, whatever he's going through, he doesn't feel anything either. And I understood that emotional beat, as disturbing as it was, and how it ended up linking to a personal memory that is not very fun, of when you're going through that amount of pain or whatever grief or trauma or whatever you're going through. There's something with children, maybe, or at least like this kid and myself, where you want to externalize it. Yes, there's going to be a patch of hair missing on the side of your head. People can see that. And because you had to do it to yourself. And it's this very, kind of, I guess, like icky or disturbing scene. I think for some people who came in maybe expecting something else. But for me, it really gave me an indication of where this child is at and where he's going and where he's coming from, and just how just feeling everything is so overwhelming to him. Or like the scene where he finally gets to the house and he curls up in the bed and is exhausted and falls asleep. I haven't lost a parent. I haven't been through a war or anything like that, but I understood that grief is exhausting. You need to go to sleep. And the more lonely he is, the more isolated his mind becomes. And it's almost because of the head injury. There was a short bit, like maybe 10 minutes, where I thought, is everything that's happening in this movie because he has a head injury? Is he hallucinating? And of course, that's not the case. That's not the point of the film whatsoever. But it did remind me that when you're that isolated, you start hallucinating company or someone to talk to or friends. And the Heron was kind of that in the beginning, but it ultimately branched into something else.
Well, and especially I think that also goes deeper with Japanese culture, where the tendency tends to be you want to portray yourself as strong. You don't want to necessarily have that external output of emotion, especially as a boy, where you're having these expectations, especially in these times, which are older than where we are now. It's not a modern set film. I also just like his situation is like nightmarish, right? Like outside of even obviously the war and losing his mother and that, I mean, it's a tragedy you can almost not even put into words for a young boy. But he's sitting there with his new woman who's like, I'm your new mother now, and then feel my belly, you're gonna have a son, and just like I could throw up with those like emotions where like this is the worst thing I could have possibly imagined to go through. Thankfully I've never lost a parent, but like my parents divorced and I met these new people that they both found, and there's people who act like this and I'm like, oh my God, just shut up. Like, what are you doing? This is awful. I found that to be really, really quite it got a reaction. It got a strong reaction, I'll say. Those scenes to where it just made me want to throw up. Nick, to your point, I want to mention the animation style here is like also so experimental at times, specifically with the fire, especially with movement where everything is getting too intense, especially in that opening bit. That really stood out to me as far as within the context of Studio Ghibli. It feels like probably one of the more visually experimental features they've ever given. Great color design there. I also want to present one thing I couldn't get out of my mind, and it's something that like I am somewhat go quite deep with at times, is the relationship of Hayao Miyazaki as a father, because there's a lot here about the relationship between father and son. This whole idea at the end of I'm building this world for you to inhabit and you to make better could not escape his relationship with Goro Miyazaki, which is troublesome to say the least. Goro was an architect and then got pulled into his father's world. His father was like atrocious at the premiere of his first film, walks out telling critics it's horrible and that Goro failed him. It seems like they patched some stuff up now, but like Goro was gonna be the next person for Studio Ghibli, and then Hayao Miyazaki was like, no, you're not controlling this company, you're not good enough. Like, it just, I could not escape this notion of like, this movie presents this idea of very within the family, but also in a way that feels very, even though the character's not the father of our main character, it feels very, I created this like a father would, and I'm passing this down to you. Yeah, that's not the experience Hayao Miyazaki had, and I believe Hayao even said like, I made this for my nephew. He did not say he made this for his son, which I think is like crazy. I just could not escape consistently reading these relationships and really reading this and thinking about the father in this movie, who's also a quite distant father. I mean, he obviously cares, but he's at the factory every day making these warplanes, these works of art, as the kid says, which also contextualizing that within the war conversation where, you know, and Miyazaki's done this a ton, go watch The Wind Rises, but his family's contributing to this war and is playing an active part in it that took everything from him. But that absentee father and then getting raised by these women around him, just all that really was in my mind about Goro and about that relationship from Miyazaki. And I don't know if I've necessarily landed on a very clear like statement or thesis around that, but I could not escape that watching this. I don't know if either of you picked up on that at all or had thoughts.
That was something I wasn't aware of until after I finished the film, and I'm learning once again in real time right now what that relationship was like, you know, and having, I can't imagine what it'd be like. You make a film and your father talks about how terrible it is and that sort of thing. That's a lot. And of course, like Miyazaki's relationship with his own father, if that was reflected in the film, it does make sense. And like you mentioned earlier, Carson, not only like a generational thing, but also what it was like to be raised to be a Japanese man at that time, you know, growing up from, you know, a kid to having to be whatever your parents think you're going to be. There's so much literature and art, films, just tons. There's been a lot expressed about this, about the particular pressure that I'd say, like, especially like Japan and China, I'll highlight those two in particular, as far as like the media we consume, where there seems to be a lot more pressure put on children to do exactly what your parents want you to do or do what your parents do. And this film, it does kind of seem like it's more open-ended. Maybe there is that suggestion where it's like, here's what I've done. What are you going to do with it? And of course, you know, the idea of taking over is rejected and that world falls apart. But at the same time, the important thing about being a parent, and take this with a grain of salt because this is coming from someone who is not a parent herself, But the little bit I know is that your responsibility as a parent, when you bring that child into the world, is not to treat that child as an extension of yourself. Your job is to guide them through their life and figure out how to be the best that they can be and understand the world the way that they understand it and figure out who they are. Not to do what you want them to do, not to continue your legacy. It's about giving them the tools they need in order to be a good person. And inevitably, you're going to make mistakes. I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with being, in a relationship with anybody. But it is possible, and this is coming from someone who is very much on the outside, not only as a Miyazaki fan, a Studio Ghibli enthusiast, an American adding commentary to a Japanese story, is that it's possible that there is that slight suggestion where it's about letting go of that expectation, especially like near the end of your life, and thankfully not on his deathbed, because that would be too late. But, being a little bit more open about create your own thing.
One text I just watched for the first time this month that I think would play wonderfully in conversation with this reading is Jiro Dreams of Sushi, specifically because it's also from a very specific Japanese context. But it is a documentary about this old man who runs a sushi restaurant. He's like the master of sushi. He's considered like the best there is. And his son has like spent his entire life trying to follow in his footsteps. He's like 50 years old, his son is, and is still just trying to live up to those expectations of the father, and is like neither of them have any life outside of sushi. It's just all they do every single day. And the film presents it in both this like complex way where it's kind of inspiring, where you want this guy to continue his father's legacy, but also it's quite horrifying in many ways, how he's just given up his life to follow this shadow and follow this image. And again, I think specifically because that is so focused in Japanese male culture in this sense, I think that would be really fascinating to rewatch with this film also in mind, again, from this reading.
I'll just add to that a little bit. I have seen that film. It's been a while, but I couldn't agree more. If you do want to see a more realistic portrayal of that. And I will say, like, it's not, there is a kind of a twist at the end, not like a shocking, like, upending twist, but it does suggest something at the very end of that film that does change the way that you think about their relationship, where you think, oh, okay, that's very interesting, actually. So I couldn't recommend that enough. I just wanted to add that in there.
I'll have to watch it, definitely.
That feels like one you would have watched, but I would recommend it. It's definitely interesting. Do you guys have anything else that you want to talk about with The Boy and the Heron?
I have one thing that's very important to me. It's just the design of the heron, because I went into this film, as I said, not knowing anything, and so you first see the heron and you're like, okay, looks a bit creepy. Then he starts talking. It's like, okay, weird voice. Then he shows teeth. It's like, yes. Where are we going with this? And
like like Sonic the Hedgehog, like the rejected Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yes.
It's like, no.
And those bulging eyes, and then the giant nose. And it was genuinely unsettling the first time around. And again, it speaks to the power of Miyazaki that in pretty much all of his movies, every time he creates something that's very scary, disturbing, evil, he deconstructs it in a way that, and it reminds me, I don't remember I'm blanking on the name of the director, but the one who made the Little Mouse animated films. Wait, what's his name? Like the Fievel. What's his?
You're thinking of Fievel. So
Fievel. Don Bluth. I believe it was Don Bluth who was talking about how you can throw anything you want at children, scary, thrills, whatever, but as long as you have a happy ending, they'll be fine. And I think the way that Miyazaki every time creates these disturbing images, and then he just destroys them, like the fact that the heron becomes a good guy by the end, a comedic sidekick punchline in the second half, when at first he's incredibly disturbing. I don't know, I love the design. I love that he goes from this magnificent floating creature to this chubby little man who can barely fly his wings and it sounds like a fly. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's something that is done so often as well. I think it goes back to what you were saying, Carson, of how there's so much from various films. In this case, the character of the Heron reminded me of the witch from the Howl's Moving Castle, Floating Castle. Um, because yeah, even in that one you have this weird character, a bit evil, who then by the end, it's minor spoilers, but like she becomes kind of like a helper of sorts, and all of the villainous characteristics are broken down and they become more human, and just the empathy becomes more inherent from just the visuals alone, which is something that I love about animation. I love the limitless powers that are there. So yeah, I love the character design. I love the Warawaras. They're amazing. They're cute. Every movie needs to have a cute sidekick, little thing that they can sell as plushies, and the Warawaras are amazing. And also, again, as we talked about on the Nausicaa episode, I just love the quiet moments in here. Something that, like the fact that in the same year, people were flocking to ADHD incarnate into the Spider Verse, among the Spider Verse, whatever, which gave me a headache. It's 2 hours, 40 minutes long. It is non-stop, like things happening, sound, visual, bing, bam, boom. The fact that here you have like, quiet, guys walking, he's on a boat, the forest, like, oh yes, more of this, please. And it keeps you engaged. It never gets boring. The pacing is immaculate. But yeah, like those were some things I really didn't mention properly before. Sorry. Very scattershot. But yeah. I don't know if you, Hillary, have some as well that you wanted to share.
No, I think I did, and my mind just went completely blank. So someone say something, please.
Carson. Well, I don't know. I guess I get a lot of emotions from this, thinking not just might this be the last Miyazaki film, but also the last Studio Ghibli film. Like, and it's wild that it's genuinely very possible. Like, there's no one at the studio outside of Miyazaki who's actively producing films and making films. Everyone else has died, tragically, and they've just not been able to find that new set of voices. I don't know. I get a lot of reflection and poignance from that. I'm happy that we could talk about this while it's still airing and see this in the theaters, right? Like, it saddens me that in 10 years, people who are in our positions getting into films and exploring cinema will not be able to go to the cinema and see new Studio Ghibli, see new Miyazaki. And I think it is like a really beautiful final film in that way, with that weight and that gravitas. Like, I like The Wind Rises. I have some issues with it. It actually would be quite of an interesting podcast, I feel, one day. But I'm happy that he came back and did this. I think this is like a really beautiful final point for his career. So I appreciate this film's, identity with that. And obviously the film understands that identity. Again, he is apparently working on some new stuff. But this, and I also will say, I think we really need to celebrate that this film even got made. The production of this was insane. Hand-drawn, taking years and years. Originally was going to come out for the 2020 Olympics, and then obviously COVID hit. People were giving updates like, oh, we spent 3 years on this and we're 5% in. It's a marvelous thing that this even ended up getting released. And I think, especially, not to be dark, but like, I think about Lynch's passing, and I think about how we're losing so many of these foundational voices we come to celebrate. And I feel warm knowing like Miyazaki got another one in, right? We got to go see it. He got to see the release. He got to be honored with an Academy Award. Not that I think he gives a fuck about that, but I still just love that we were able to have this moment. I'm very grateful for that, because a lot of filmmakers do not get that moment. They do not get that final send-off, that final, here's our moment to celebrate you. And I'm curious to see how this one ages. I'm curious to see how the conversation around this one continues to grow. Studio Ghibli is one of those that, like, they still play in cinemas all the time. They still have those yearly marathons of Studio Ghibli projects widely available now. I was just thinking that when I was turning it on. Like, I remember 10 years ago when you could not find Studio Ghibli films. You had to buy the Blu-ray from like a specific store, and that was the only way to view these movies. Now they're on Netflix internationally. They're on Max in the States. Plus documentaries, like you mentioned, Nick. Go for it.
I will add, they are on Netflix because of The Boy and the Heron, which is something I did not know, but they were desperately needing funding and they were not getting as much money as needed. And so they were looking into alternative deals. And one of them was selling their rights to Netflix internationally, worldwide, to screen the movies, also including Boy and the Heron. And that's how they got a lot of money to continue production. So it's almost like a deal with the devil type thing, where they were like convincing Miyazaki, like he doesn't know anything about how Netflix works. It's like, no, but it's good. Like we need the money. It's okay.
Yeah. Did you guys watch this dub? I know, Hillary, I believe you mentioned you watched it dubbed. Did you guys watch this dubbed or subbed? I've never seen the dub of this. I've only seen the subtitled version.
I wanted to address that because with these films in particular, I prefer to watch them in Japanese with subtitles. But because I heard the voice work, particularly Robert Pattinson's voice work, was so crazy. I have a quote here from the director in the US who did the dub, and this is what he said. He said, when he came to our studio in LA, he was like, okay, I've been thinking about this role and I recorded some stuff. Do you want to hear it? And he whips out his iPhone and plays some stuff that he's just been doing in the Memos Act. And it was already the voice. I was like, oh, bingo, you've already got the character. So I did listen to the English dub this time, but I plan on watching it again with the Japanese, the original Japanese cast. I did switch back and forth a little bit while I was watching because I just wanted to hear Japanese. But overall, I thought I'll just stick with it. I'll watch this one time and then I'll watch it again. But my experience with the English dub was that it was really well done. And there were some interesting, it was weird. At one point, Willem Dafoe voices a pelican and Robert Pattinson is there as the heron. And I was like, oh, it's a lighthouse reunion. And also they're birds, which is also in the lighthouse. So it was just kind of like one of those weird things. But that's not what the film is. I would recommend listening to it or hearing the voices that were originally there.
They're water birds. I
Yes.
will say, I definitely, the next time I'm going to view the dub, I've wanted to watch the dub and I don't know why I didn't. I was not thinking. But Studio Ghibli overall tends to be really good about their dubs. So I don't think that's necessarily like a wrong way to watch it. But the cast for this one's like phenomenal. And I've only heard rave reviews, so I'm interested.
Yeah, same.
Did you watch
But I've only Japanese. I came close one time. I started watching. I think it was Castle in the Sky. I was watching it in Japanese, and then at some point I had to. It was on the tablet. I had to stop it to do some other things, and I was like, I'll just finish watching it on the laptop. And on the laptop, it started playing the English dub, and the soundtrack was different.
What?
And I was like, what a second. Like these sound effects, the music. And I was like, no, this doesn't sound right. I went back 10 seconds, switched to Japanese, and it was like way quieter. Just like, oh, this is weird. And so after that, when I was watching the rest of the Ghibli films I was missing, the Miyazaki films I was missing, I was like, I'm not doing the English because it scared me. Like they have, at least for the early ones, I am unlikely for the newer ones, but for the early ones, they changed some of the music, they changed some of the sound effects. It was weird, absolutely weird. A moment that has no music, and in the American was like da 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 strings and stuff.
What we know us Americans could never watch something that's silent, Nick. It is wild. And conversation for another day, but seeing how the US treated the early releases, and there's some people who I'm not going to name who had heavy hands in it. There's a great story of Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli sending him a sword, threatening him if he made cuts to, I believe it was Princess Mononoke. It's insane how they treated some of those early releases. So again, very grateful we have those on streaming in original format and form, because it did not exist.
But I do want to watch the English dub just because I've heard very good things about Pattinson. I did do that. The only movie that I did that for, also because I had prejudices, so I was like, it's fine for this one. Tales of the Earthsea, I was dubbed because people were talking very positively about Willem Dafoe in that one, and he is indeed great. And there's Timothy Dalton as well, so I was like, well, great voices, thumbs up.
Yeah.
For a great film.
Yeah, and I was going to say that Carson mentioned how they keep screening them here. Whenever you see them in the US, they're always dubbed. They do not play the Japanese version. So I've seen Howl's Moving Castle dubbed, definitely. I will say the highlight of that for me, Christian Bale is in that, by the way. I think he's in the main cast for sure. It's just Billy Crystal's voice work in Howl's Moving Castle. What made it work?
Is he the Flame?
So. He's the Flame, and he's so great.
I can totally picture that. Oh, nice. Nice, nice, nice.
It's perfect
Okay.
casting.
Nice.
Hillary, did you remember anything you want to talk about? Or
Yes, there's a few things I circled. Earlier when, by circled, I mean I have written notes in front of me and I'm circling things, but earlier Nicola was talking about the design for the Heron and how it becomes, I think it is a cross between it shifting, not only as far as like its character, but how I guess the audience and other characters may perceive it. At one point I did write down, I said, it's like a bug-eyed Danny DeVito in bird footy pajamas. And once you start seeing that, it's not very much of a threat anymore. It's just like this, it's its own creature. I can't really put words to it, but it does become less threatening than, like a heron's jaw unhinging and like a head coming out of its throat talking. And I think that would be overwhelming for kids. The other thing that Carson brought up just a few minutes back about send-offs. We are very lucky in this way that we're able to see a very good, well-crafted, very rich film, like I said before, that I think will definitely mean something 10 to 15 years from now and beyond, and people will still be able to have very interesting conversations about it, because that doesn't happen for everybody. And it did make me think about the season that just wrapped for You Must Remember This. The theme for this season was The Old Man Is Still Alive. And it's about all these directors who as they drifted in past middle age into becoming older, they made films that got stranger and stranger. And some of them made films that were not great at all or very, very forgettable. Or only, I think, a few actually got some in that were great. So it does bring me back to Miyazaki and really pointing out just how singular he is and how he is an exception to that rule, that you can get older and keep creating things that are absolutely fantastic. So I think once again, I just have to give him praise where praise is due, because making a film just itself, especially an animated film, is no small feat. And making a really good one when you're at his age, that's like a miracle. So can't speak highly of him enough. I think there's one last thing. Oh, one of the early exposures I had to this film was through a YouTube channel called Cinema Therapy. I will say, as a little bit of a caveat, before anyone who ends up checking out the episode they did about this, there is a lot of ads, so you might have to scrub through some product placement and try to get through it. But it's a very interesting YouTube channel that brings like a therapist and a filmmaker together, and they share their perspectives on particular films. So they do one on The Boy and the Heron, particularly about grief, about family, about dealing with the death of a parent and having to put up with changes at a young age for an entire family unit changing quite drastically. As Carson mentioned before, it might seem like it's not a big deal, but having adults move way too fast for a child, like, hey, like, oh, we got married. Oh, I'm pregnant now. You're going to have a brother. You didn't have any say in this. Now it's happening. You better get used to it. It can be very devastating for a kid. And I don't remember the episode particularly if it addresses that, but I would recommend checking that out if you want to see a very particular therapeutic take on what this film might be about. And it also goes back to what Carson was saying is kind of, become the gist of this podcast, which is about healing through cinema, and very much, maybe healing some things. And of course, figuring out who you are and accepting who you are through art. So I felt like I had to throw that in at the last minute.
love it. So I think that's going to do it today for our conversation, The Boy and the Heron. Guys, I'm at 5 stars for this officially. We did it. Definitely, I think we all recommend you go check this out with the right mindset. Don't go in expecting like, oh, this is going to be fun, like Castle in the Sky, like lighthearted Totoro. Like there's a lot here to dissect and have a conversation on, but I think we all agree it's very much so worth it. You can find it on Netflix internationally or on Max in the States. Alongside was the documentary on Netflix, Nick, about this?
It is on the Italian and German Netflix. I don't think it's worldwide, but it is in some countries at least.
I will see if I can access it and check. So I'll do the research department thing. I'll be quiet and I'll let I'll let you guys know.
Love it. Well, while you do that, let's move on to our question of the week. Because one thing, again, not that awards matter that much. I don't want to give the wrong image. But this did win Best Animated Feature, which I thought was pretty cool. I like seeing Miyazaki get another trophy. Miyazaki, again, did not attend the ceremony for different reasons this time. But still, I appreciated that as an upset and as a big moment, especially because I didn't like what it was running against. So our question of the week today is, what is your favorite film to win Best Animated Feature at the Academy Awards? It's a newer category established in, 2001 with Shrek. So since then, what has really inspired you from this category? Nick, I'll turn it over to you first. What's your favorite?
It's a category that I've actually thought about a lot over the past few months, especially when Flow won recently. I thought that was a very inspired win. But I have to say, I wanted to pick one per decade very quickly, simply because Ratatouille, I mean, come on, it's Ratatouille. I think it's probably my most watched Pixar film when I was a kid. I haven't seen it in, I want to say 12, 13 years. It's been a long time. I need to revisit Ratatouille, but that one I still remember very fondly. One movie that it took me a while to actually get to and really appreciate, but I do really like Rango from the 2010s. I think that was another inspired win. Could not believe that one won. It was during a darker period of Pixar and Disney where they were not putting out masterpiece after masterpiece necessarily. And just more recently, I'm a Del Toro stan. We know that. And I was so full of joy when his Pinocchio won. And I mean, also Mark Gustafson's Pinocchio, because he's also worked his ass off on that film to make it as good as it is with the stop motion. But yeah, those three showcase just different types of animation, from the 3D and the stop motion. I would have said probably just generally, it might actually genuinely be The Boy and the Heron. All things considered, I do love this movie quite a lot. But yeah, no, it's an interesting category. But they have some stinkers that one as well. But I doubt they will be picked by either of you.
Yeah, there's been some stinkers. I mean, you mentioned a lot of really great ones. A Spirited Away also was great. I mean, The Boy and the Heron, I think, might just be my genuine answer, but like Rango's very fun. Ratatouille's a standout. I'm also going to go Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Not that I'm like a huge stan of that film or I think it's like the best movie ever made, but I think it's a really, really solid animated movie. And this is also like right at the prime of when Disney was just winning no matter what. And I was like, oh God, this new film comes out, it was so good. This visual style was revolutionary. I don't like the sequel, but I thought this one was really strong. And I was like, oh, it's so annoying that Disney's just going to win. And then this actually won. I want to revisit this and well, I guess I have a few years until the next one. But I really appreciate this film, even as someone who doesn't like the superhero genre that much, and don't necessarily even enjoy this series that much, I would say. But I think this entry was really fantastic. Hillary, research department, what did you find online, and what is your answer for your favorite film to win Best Animated Feature?
Yes, I found out some unfortunate news. The Boy and the Heron is not streaming on Netflix in the US. It's on Max. So maybe the documentary is included on Max. I don't have a subscription there, so I don't know. But just, for any of you, yeah, just don't go looking for it on Netflix. You'll be disappointed. But there's other, it appears that there's other Studio Ghibli films there. And then my answer to that, I have to say, looking at what has won was very interesting to me, because there's films in there that I liked or remembered seeing, but it, like Nicolò said, you sometimes think like, it's been 11 years since I've seen that. I don't remember it very well, or, maybe I wouldn't like it as much now. All that kind of a doubt creeping up in the back of your head. And shockingly, like looking at all of them, I think the one that is the highlight for me is Flow. I saw that film before it was nominated, and before it was nominated and started getting buzz. And there was something just very touching about that to me, because those were the kind of narratives that I really gravitated toward as a child. Animals, no dialogue, on a journey, there's peril and stuff like that. Those were like the books and the television and movies that I was interested in as a kid. And there's things that grew out of that I think are really good as well. As far as like, I heard that Black cat adoptions are actually up, which is wonderful, because Black animals just don't get adopted as much. There's still superstitions and prejudices about them. So if the film can change that, I think it's fantastic. But overall, out of everything, I mean, all the Disney stuff is great. Spider-Man is, I mean, like Carson said, it did move it into like a completely new style. And I'm personally excited because I did hear, I don't know if this is going forward or not, for sure, but they are going to do like a short series about Spider-Man noir. So the idea of like Nick Cage having his own like Spider-Man stories and being all like, I punch Nazis and drink egg creams. I mean, I'll definitely be interested in seeing that. But yeah, my short answer is Flow. Beautiful film. Did not expect it to get any attention. Did not expect it to win an Oscar by any means. So that's the one for me.
Yeah, I think even if you're not the biggest fan of that film, like its win is very inspiring and very like cool. It's a really fun like little movie that I definitely appreciate. I also like that they animated the little cat with a trophy to put on stage while the win was happening. That was good.
Oh.
Now we're going to move on to rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we want to talk about that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'm going to go quickly because I have two things that are very quick. First up, me and my bestie Jane Campion, we linked back up this week as I finally watched The Piano, 1993. This is like her big film. This is the one everyone loves. And I was fine with it. It's my favorite Jane Campion to date. Not that that says much. I think there are some ideas here that are like poetry. I think this is obviously this concept of looking at the power of female voice and how that is attacked by men who don't want to hear their truths. Putting that in context with the piano, I thought was fun. I thought it was a good idea. Does the film really go past that really initial concept? For me, not really. I still think her directing is like boring and atrocious. But from a screenplay perspective, Jane Campion has something here. And I hope this is one of those few films where I'm like, I would love to see this remade with someone like Kelly Reichardt, for example, behind the director's chair. Because I think there's some really, really great ideas here. I just don't think Jane Campion has the ability to bring that out on screen in a way that is captivating or makes the most of those ideas. But I gave it 3 stars. So you know what, Jane Campion, you got a positive grade overall from me. Good on you. First time for everything. I also watched episode 1 of season 2 of The Rehearsal. I will say, actually, you know what? I'll have another one after this. I watched The Rehearsal season 2. I love the first season. The first season's like this wild ride. I like pretty much everything Nathan Fielder does. I thought this was a good episode of TV. Definitely uncomfortable. Definitely like exactly immediately brings back what you want from the series. Very curious where this is going. Again, only episode 1 so far. But I definitely enjoyed it. I think if you're a fan of The Rehearsal, if you're a fan of Nathan Fielder's just awkwardness where you want to throw up and you're at the edge of your seat, highly would recommend. I also this week can finally discuss Andor season 2 because I'm such a big Star Wars fan. I'm a Star Wars fan, so I watched Andor because they gave me access to season 2. So I was like, why not? Look, if you want a strong political drama and you are into the Star Wars world and you just want something really good within that world, I would honestly recommend Andor. I think this is probably some of the strongest work when it comes to politics Star Wars has ever done. Very, very explicitly looking at the rise of fascism, the controlling of misinformation, leading up to Rogue One, which just, and I can't get too much into specifics, but season 2 of the show really leads directly into Rogue One. The only issue with that being that while the season's really good, your immediate vibe is, okay, I can't wait to see the story continue in Rogue One. And then you turn on Rogue One and still Rogue One, which I would say is not a good movie. If you love that film, that's not going to be an issue for you. But me and Gareth Edwards, it is a 3-star film. It's middle of the road, just like all of his projects. So for me, that's a little bit deflating. But especially if you're a fan of Andor season 1, this season's going to deliver everything you want and more. So would recommend all of those, really. Nick, what have you seen this week?
As I mentioned, I did see Hayao Miyazaki and the Heron, which I can confirm is on Max in the States. So the listeners can do that if Just Watch is to be trusted. I've seen a bunch of things since I've last been on the podcast, but I only wanted to do a very super quick highlights. Finally watched Sing Sing. I thought Sing Sing was fantastic, very, very moving. I watched it in the cinema, in the Kino in Berlin. And yeah, I think it goes on for like 5 minutes too long, even though I get why there's the final scene, but there was a perfect cut to black moment. They didn't do that. Fair enough. I get that. But yeah, that was very moving. Speaking of Miyazaki, The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, the movie about the making of Princess Kaguya to an extent, but primarily The Wind Rises. Great if you want to understand how the studio works. I also did manage to watch in the cinema I'm Still Here, the foreign language winner of this year, which was terrific indeed, the best of those foreign language films in my opinion. I think I started crying after like 20 minutes into the movie, and it's almost 2.5 hours long. I was drained by the time the end credits started. But again, a film filled with hope, considering also everything that's going on now politically, not just in Brazil and in other places, but with deportations and governments making people disappear. It's very important to our times. I did watch what is a strong contender for my favorite film of the year so far, Ryan Coogler's Sinners. Outstanding, fucking outstanding. I'm sorry, but just like it's so good. It's everything that I want out of a movie. It's a movie that has genre fun. It's a movie that has ambition, that has creativity, that has craft behind it, a sense of humor, sexiness, violence, things to say, music, Irish jigs. It's amazing. It's amazing. I can't wait to rewatch it. Hopefully, very soon in the cinema. And lastly, for my podcast, I did a 1-2 punch of Steven Soderbergh's Solaris and Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris. Very good film. The Tarkovsky one, of course, I've seen it twice now. Bit too long for its own good, but great. And the Soderbergh one, it's okay. It's okay. It's 75 minutes shorter, which is a plus compared to the Russian version. But I don't know, just something felt off. But people can listen to the episode once that drops in a few weeks. It's been a good month, but very light. Mostly like work related viewings, we could say, for various
Sure, that
podcasts.
happens. Hillary, what have you seen recently?
Well, I have not seen the second season of Andor. I haven't seen the first season of Andor, but I will back up Carson and say I've heard nothing but good things. And I did see Nicolò shaking his head. I'm assuming that he loves or he liked Rogue One. I like Rogue One too, but I also the reason why is like because I like movies where everyone dies. That's kind of my thing. So that might explain a little bit why I'm a bit more high on it. As far as like the new Star Wars movies, it's like I liked Rogue One and maybe like a few other ones. But concerning what I've seen recently, I was talking with Niccolo off mic before we started this that I think that my discomfort with our political situation has just caused me to watch a lot of really old movies. So some of these are going to be older. I did watch Lonesome. It's a 1928 film. I'm not entirely sure how I got into it. I think I may have like known who the main actress was, and I thought, oh, I want to see her in something else, so I watched it. And it's just darling. It's just these two people who happen to meet on Coney Island, and they go on a date, and then they get separated. And it's about them finding each other. It's mostly silent, and then suddenly it'll go into like a scene with sound and sometimes with color, and it's just very sweet. I saw The Awful Truth with Irene Dunn and Cary Grant. Very, very funny. Can't recognize that or recommend that enough. And then, strangely enough, I've watched The Wizard of Oz twice over the past couple of months. And I'm not entirely sure why. It just kind of became a happenstance thing, but it really did remind me of watching it as a kid and why it's such a great film. And it is a testament to imagination, other worlds, and stuff, which does link with this episode. Another recommendation would be A New Leaf, Elaine May's first film. I didn't hear anything about this film until it was slotted as an episode on Uncut Gems, which we recorded, and I watched it, and it was just so random and batshit and unhinged and funny and fucked up in all the best ways possible. Just can't recommend it enough. If you are subscribed to Uncut Gems or listen to that as well, look out for that episode because damn, that's a really funny movie. And then lastly, totally off the beaten path compared to these other films, I did watch Occupied City, which is one of the heaviest watches I've seen in a long time, but it does relate back to things that Carson mentioned and Niccolo mentioned in the recommendations, which is it's an essential watch if you're trying to find ways to better understand and also really, I guess, like mentally prepare yourself for just like how oppressive fascism or the erosion of rights can be. It is 4 hours long. It is not an easy watch. I'd say that most people would probably lose their minds while watching and listening to this. I did hear that Steve McQueen, the director, said there's a 36-hour version of this, and I thought that would kill me. But if you have the time to see something and you really want to get something out of it, especially if you live in the United States, like I mentioned, and we don't get it, we don't understand. If you listen to 4 hours of this, I think by the time you're done with this, you'll better understand just how serious this could actually be if it escalates. So in a nutshell, those are my recommendations.
Oh, those are some good recommendations. Occupied City's very heavy watch and Lonesome. Could not recommend that enough to viewers at home. There are some visuals in Lonesome that still stick out to my mind. It's a really, really brilliantly crafted film, I will say. So with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. In case you missed it, all month long, we've been talking about Miyazaki. So if you found this episode and you're like, wow, I wish to hear some of these people talk about Pocorosso or Nazca the Valley of the Wind, go check those episodes out. As Hillary mentioned at the top, we also have our Grave of the Fireflies episode from last year. That is one of my favorites, so go check that out. Absolutely. Recently on Patreon, we posted our review of Sinners, so definitely seek that one out. And then next month, we're done with Miyazaki. We're going into a bit of a random time. We're celebrating Star Wars Day by reviewing The Phantom Menace. I know Jack has a lot to say. I guess we'll just leave it there. Don't be shocked when a long episode hits your feed, because I know Jack has endless thoughts about that film. So I'm sure we're going to get into those. And then the week after, to celebrate the Cannes Film Festival, we're going into the world of Hong Sang-soo. I believe for the first time in our podcast history, we're going to be reviewing Claire's Camera. A little short film takes place at Cannes, so that should be a fun little entry. Sadly, this year, we're not going to have Nick and Jack in a hotel room surrounded by helicopters as they're smoking cigars, giving us a Cannes review. So just know we're supplementing that with this one for this year. With that said, where can we find everyone on social media? Hillary?
Yes, you can find me in my usual spot. I am on Letterboxd. You can find me under the name Degelle, Degelle. And then there is a little link beneath my name, the campsite.bio, which it leads to a link tree taking you to other projects. I am working on things right now. Last month, I re-edited Skinamarink and wrote about my experience with that. And this month, I'm making a mixtape of film scores and sounds from 38 films and turning them into a mixtape. And I'm almost finished with them. So if you want to see that, go to my link tree. I think you just click on Degelle and it'll take you to my blog. And you can listen to or download that mixtape for free, probably in the next few days.
Love it. Nick, where can we find you on social media?
I'm excited to listen to the mixtape once it drops. You can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky at NikkiCredit97. You can follow me on Letterboxd as well. Just look for Nicolò Grasso. You can watch my short films and videos on YouTube and Vimeo at Enjoy the Movies. And you can also listen to my own podcast, Anatomy of an Adaptation. Both Carson and Hillary have been guests, will be guests there. And by the time this episode drops, I think we have a new conversation talking about Childhood of a Leader with a good friend of mine, Raphael. So check that out.
And you can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the podcast. Again, we'll be back next week to discuss Star Wars. But thank you for joining us for this Miyazaki series. Goodbye.